Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here because, well, we're about to completely reframe everything you might think you know about nutrition science. If you're picturing yourself reading dusty textbooks and just memorizing a bunch of rigid facts, do me a favor and erase that image right now. Nutrition science is actually much less like a boring textbook and much, much more like a thrilling, century-long cold case investigation. It's literally a biological detective story packed with mysteries, false leads, and brilliant breakthroughs. And today, we're going to learn exactly how that fascinating detective work is actually done.
Here is a quick look at our agenda for this session. We'll start with the scientist as detective, then open up the toolkit of inquiry. After that, we'll dive into the great Goiter mystery, before wrapping up with reaching a scientific consensus, the peer review process, and the never-ending cycle. Let's get right to it.
Section 1, the scientist as detective, investigating the clues. Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand how human knowledge builds over time, we kind of need to completely change how we view researchers. Scientists aren't just rigid people standing around in pristine white lab coats. No, they're active, relentless investigators trying to solve incredibly complex biological mysteries. Think about it. The method a police detective uses to investigate a crime is strikingly similar to how a nutritional scientist works. A detective arrives at a scene, makes observations, tests suspects, and interprets physical clues, right? Well, a nutritional scientist discovers the health effects of food by doing the exact same thing. They make an initial observation, test a suspect, which, they call a hypothesis, and then they interpret the data. Both rely on a highly organized, rigorous process of inquiry to separate fact from absolute fiction.
Moving right along to Section 2, the toolkit of inquiry, the scientific method.
So if scientists are our detectives, what exactly is in their toolkit? Well, the foundational tool is the scientific method. Simply put, this is the organized process of inquiry used in forensic science, nutritional science, and honestly every other science out there to discover truths. It's absolutely crucial to remember that this isn't just some random set of rules. It's the universal standard for how human knowledge continuously builds and refines itself over time.
Let's break down how this actually builds step by step. It always starts with an observation or a question. Then the researcher formulates a hypothesis, basically an educated guess that explains what they observed. Next up is the experiment, which is the testing phase. And here's a massive point for you guys to keep in mind. A good experimental design always takes into account what's been done previously. Researchers have to undertake a thorough review of published past research before they even start, just to ensure they're actually advancing the field. After the experiment comes the analysis, where they collect data to either support or totally refute that hypothesis. Finally, if multiple experiments consistently support it, researchers can confidently offer a conclusion.
But please, whatever you do not mistake this for a simple one-and-done checklist. The scientific method is incredibly cyclical. It is not a straight line. Science is absolutely filled with surprises, big and small. Sometimes scientists make mistakes, or maybe they fail to test an important variable. Even experiments that go exactly as planned, or ones that completely, utterly fail, still lead us right back to step one to ask new, better questions. Unexpected results? They aren't the end. They're just the beginning of a brand new investigation. Which perfectly sets up Section 3, the Great Goiter Mystery, a century-long cold case. To really see this cyclical process in its messy, real-world action, let's look at a wild historical case study, the Great Goiter Mystery. So goiter is an enlargement of the thyroid gland in the neck, and for a very long time, it was a massive medical cold case. Back in the mid-1800s, the medical community was completely lost. People commonly believed goiter was caused by, get this, poor hygiene, drunkenness, dampness in the air, contaminated water, or even an infectious disease. I mean, they had their suspect list entirely wrong, mostly because they hadn't yet properly applied the scientific method to narrow down the true cause.
But then the pieces slowly started coming together, though it literally took over a century. Check out this timeline. In 1811, a French chemist named Bernard Courtois was isolating saltpeter to make gunpowder for Napoleon's army. By burning seaweed, he suddenly observed this intense violet vapor that crystallized. That element was named iodine. 2 years later, in 1813, a Swiss physician named Coindet hypothesized that this new iodine could actually cure goiter, so he experimented with an iodine tincture, and it worked. Fast forward to 1851, Schotten hypothesized that low iodine in inland areas was the culprit. Then, in 1918,
A doctor named Bayard actually loaded iodized salt onto mules, yes, mules, and transported it to a remote village at the base of the Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps for a 6-month trial. It drastically reduced goiter cases. Finally, physician David Marine conducted a massive experiment treating over 4,000 schoolchildren in Akron, Ohio. Because of these cascading experiments by multiple teams across the world, the U.S. initiated a public health program in 1924 to iodize salt. Over 100 years of detective work.
And the real-world results of that century-long investigation? Well, today, more than 70% of American households use iodized salt. To put that into perspective, this historical scientific triumph is sitting directly on your own kitchen table right now, silently protecting you from a disease that baffled the smartest doctors for generations. Section 4. Reaching a scientific consensus.
Now, this brings us to a really, really important question. With all those competing theories, the infectious disease theory, the dampness theory, and over 100 years of intense debate across the globe, how did scientists finally agree? Well, it comes down to a fundamental truth of the field. Uncertainty is just a part of the scientific process. Scientists have to grapple with different explanations. They literally must remain incredibly open-minded to alternative theories, like that infectious disease theory for goiter, until the sheer weight of the evidence overwhelms it. They don't just guess, they follow the data, even when it's super confusing. And eventually, all that data leads right here to consensus. Consensus is when multiple teams of researchers looking at the exact same question from completely different perspectives and through different approaches broadly agree on certain observations and interpretations of the data. You see, scientific advances almost never happen because of one lone genius having a eureka moment. It takes immense, sustained collaboration over decades to finally agree that yes, iodine deficiency definitively causes goiter. Section 5. The peer review process. Science's quality control. Of course, scientists today don't just rely on loading salt onto mules in the Swiss Alps anymore. We have moved into the modern era where scientists have a highly formal, structured system. So I want you to ask yourself this. How do scientists actually check each other's work before it becomes a widely accepted consensus? Who are the police chiefs of the scientific world ensuring these detectives aren't just cutting corners? The answer is the peer review process. Today, most scientists present their results in peer-reviewed publications. These are scientific papers scrutinized by qualified colleagues, people who are experts in that exact same field. The goals here are strict. They want to ensure the research is original, significant, logical, and thorough. This is science's ultimate quality control. These peers evaluate papers before they are published, they review grant proposals to decide who even gets funding, and they aggressively critique presentations at scientific conferences. And this is a absolutely crucial takeaway for you. Peer review doesn't mean a study is suddenly perfect. Sometimes bad studies do slip through the cracks. Science is a human endeavor, which means it is inherently messy and imperfect. However, because these findings are published and then read by thousands of other scientists worldwide, those mistakes are usually caught, challenged, and often retracted later. The beauty of it is that science is the ultimate self-correcting mechanism.
Finally, Section 6, the never-ending cycle. Science is never done.
We've journeyed all the way from a simple observation of a violet vapor to the rigorous, demanding hurdles of modern peer review. And the main lesson here is that science is never truly done. Because the scientific method is cyclical, every single conclusion merely serves as the foundation for a brand new observation. It is a continuous, self-correcting engine of discovery. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. If every answer we find just uncovers an even deeper question, what biological mystery will the scientific method solve next? Keep observing, keep questioning, and I highly encourage you to keep exploring the incredible detective story of nutritional science. Thank you